I'm not sick or struck dumb, or don't you know a kick when you see one can't quit? We're not done, we're gonna kick till the next one. Hello one and all, and welcome to The Kick. This is a theme, scheme, and movie podcast on the Now Playing Network. I am your host, Chance Solom Pfeiffer, and welcome to a new Kick. To close out the year, I'm inviting some of my favorite guests back on the show to discuss their 2024 passion projects, aka whatever movie they select that they can't stop thinking or talking about. On the horn today, it's dear friend of the program. He is the editor and founder of Fools Who Dream, a movie criticism website of his own creation. Also relevant this time of year, he is the co-chief of the Portland Critics Association, where he helps keep all of us Portland critics lovingly suffocated in screeners. Ben Campbell Ferguson, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Chance, and congratulations on a year of The Kick.
Thank you. Yeah, we're closing out one full year. How is the end of year season treating you? What with all the screeners and the watching and the list making?
Well, I just got the much looked forward to Neon box the other day, so
Oh, buddy.
very, very amped. You know, it's funny. I think every time I get to the end of the year, there's like until November, I think, this year wasn't as good as last year. And then by the time I start watching things in November, it's like, oh my God, there's too many good movies. It's kind of a problem.
Why do they do it to us with that kind of annual structure that way?
I know, yeah.
That's a perfect summation of that feeling for most of the year, where you look at your top 10 and you're like, well, this can't be it, can it? And then all of a sudden there's like an influx of like 20 contenders. You don't even know where to put them or how to deal with it.
I was getting worried when Twisters was still in my you know? And I love Twisters, but that felt like it's a really bad year if Twisters is like number 4 or 5.
Yeah. I remember you telling me that like 4 months ago, and it made me laugh hard then too. It's just, we saw Twisters together, I think. And
yes, good times.
And then in September, October, you were like, this isn't right. It was good, but like, come on. Where do you think it's going to end the year in general, Twisters?
Twisters will absolutely be an honorable mention because it's just too delightful to completely leave out in the cold.
It just has honorable mention quality written all over it.
It really does, yeah. And by the way, honorable mentions are no slouch. Many wonderful films. Some of my favorite films are honorable mentions, Chance.
There you go. Well, I like the movie you picked today because, speaking of kind of like November, December overwhelm, one of my favorite parts of just being on this annual roller coaster as a critic is like thinking back on movies that came out in April and May and being like, is that going to get any attention? I should watch that again to see if I liked it as much as I thought I did, to give it a little shine, to consider it for something on my acting ballot. And I think the movie that you picked today fits right into that wheelhouse, and also kind of a wheelhouse for you and I because it was made here in Oregon. In fact, it was shot in the town I live in of Astoria. It stars Daisy Ridley. And I was also like, I feel like I talk to Ben all the time when the 2015 to 19 Star Wars sequels were coming out. So I feel like we often talked a little Daisy Ridley at the beginning, the flashpoint of her career there. The movie we're discussing today is Sometimes I Think About Dying, which was released by Oscilloscope Labs back in April, but I believe played at Sundance the prior year. It was kind of a long road to theatrical distribution. But Ben, let's start with the elementary question. Why did you pick Sometimes I Think About Dying for your 2024 passion project?
How you doing, Fran?
Not bad. I'd love to introduce you all to the newest member of our little family. This is Robert.
Hello. Hey. Fran, right?
Hey, Fran. Sorry. But scared ya. I'm sneaking up on people. Booga booga.
Remember
What do you call this? Coffee. No espresso.
You're funny.
Do you have plans tonight?
So did you like the movie?
I didn't really like anything about that movie.
What do you like?
My job.
What about it?
I'm good at it.
Tell me something about you.
Got divorced. I guess I can't seem to figure it out.
Figure one out.
Love.
Considering if one should die or if one should.
You're secretly good at a lot of things. You just don't let anyone know.
And I found me on the road to Genoa.
Well, I think that a lot of times in terms of films and film criticism, relatable is kind of a dirty word these days. But if we're all honest, I think all of us, when we look to movies, we're looking to learn something about our experience. We're looking to see something of our own experience reflected in a way that we feel is true, as honest, as maybe revealing. And I just completely felt that way about this movie. There were things about working in an office that felt incredibly true. There were things about living alone that felt incredibly true. There were things about desperately wanting to connect with other human beings, but also feeling terrified of that very thing. And so it's a movie where definitely I looked at it and went, okay, these characters, they're very different from me. Their life experience is very different, but there are elements that I recognize so clearly, and that moved me and made me feel hopeful. And it's a movie that has kind of stirred in the back of my head throughout the year, and kind of like what you were talking about, Chance, coming to the end, it's like, oh yeah, that really did mean something to me, and I'm grateful that movie's out there.
And we also just see so many, I guess what you could uncharitably describe as little indie movies throughout the year. There's just so many of these out there struggling to get seen and get found. And it's, you see a lot of them as a critic, and you think, or I think, good effort, guys. You really made the most of your small budget and your labor of love, but it's not all that common unless they come from someone who's sort of like a recognized master at that scale, like a Kelly Reichert, that the movies actually stick with you. And I'll talk about maybe if we have a slightly upgraded I'll ask you if we maybe have a slightly inflated rating of this one because it is so loving itself about the Oregon coast. But let me set this one up. So a solitary young woman named Fran, played by Daisy Ridley, who folks would know as Rey from the aforementioned Star Wars sequels. She lives on the north slope of Astoria, a town built into a hill out here on the coast, and she works a pretty banal desk job for the Port Authority. She's a wizard of invoices for office supplies, and her outer life is all these spreadsheets and these monochromatic sweaters that kind of say like, "Don't look at me," and cottage cheese when she gets home from work. But her inner life is this rich pageant of morbid visions, mental images of her dead body returning to the Oregon moss, or washed up on the Pacific Ocean, or sometimes like in this, I think is like a fake imagined basement of her office where maybe she's about to be like devoured by a python. And the tension in this movie, as you already summed up so well, is how will that kind of mighty contrast between the exterior and the interior remain in balance if anyone, even in like a low-key fashion, should pick at that exterior. And that's what happens when a new coworker, Robert, played by Dave Maherhy, starts to date Fran semi-casually. And with this break in routine, we see some unexpected signs of her. Like, for instance, like how well her macabre streak will work at a murder mystery dinner party. But we also see her true, genuine difficulty in being known by Robert in any way, even a "so what do you like to cook" type way. And I feel like these kind of sound like the beats of like a louder, more down the middle dramedy or something. Like a woman learns how to live when she dates a slightly goofier man. But I would say that sometimes I think about Dying plays its cards pretty close to the vest It is tender, it is sweet, it is quiet, it is agonizing at times, and a lot of that owes to Daisy Ridley's kind of ineffable superpower from the moment we saw her in Force Awakens of just rootability, of just like, oh, I care about this person. I want the best for them. And you take one look at Fran and you're just like, for the love of God, please let someone in. I could see you want more from life, and it's right there. So that would be my summation of the movie. But Ben, I let's start here. I think that this is a character study in a capital C way. You spend pretty much the whole movie being like, what is going on with this person? And how can I see that through her behavior and through her mind's eye and how she responds in all of these different contexts? So what is your theory of Fran?
I think one of the reasons I love the character so much is that it's so hard to create a theory about her. We don't know anything about her past, about her parents. We don't know, I think, if she's lived in Astoria for many years or if she just moved there. She's a very kind of elusive, mysterious figure. But I think often in movies, in a weird way, those are the characters we understand the best or feel we understand the best. The characters where the movie kind of feeds you all this information about them, sometimes that's like, well, you're sort of telling us who they are, but we don't necessarily sense who they are. And I think we really sense who Fran is. And one of the moments that I think is so powerful is that houseboat murder mystery party you mentioned, Chance, where there's a scene where they're playing this theater game where she has to fake her own death. She gives this really wonderful performance of dying, of being poisoned by acid and kind of mimicking the idea of a person wheezing their last breath as they're being eaten alive from the inside. And it's really remarkable because it's the most fun the character has in the movie. And on the one hand, it's a little disturbing that she's at her happiest kind of miming death. I mean, there is something tragic about that, but there's also something beautiful about the idea that in front of a group of people, she's able to perform or to be silly. And so you have this sense of a person who is so locked down and is so contained. And we are left to imagine whether that's because of some trauma she endured in the past, or maybe that's just the way she is. Maybe that's just her personality, or a combination thereof. But the kind of little moments when she reveals something and sort of shows a closing of the distance of the inner life and the outer life, that really shows this intense hunger to connect with people. But it's not that easy because, of course, right after that scene is when she and the Dave Merhesh character have their big falling out, and that's pretty harrowing.
I butchered Merhesh's name earlier. Thank you for thank you for catching the alley-oop I threw out of bounds 5 minutes ago. Yes, and I think Merhesh, who people would know from that from the Hulu show Rami, he says like, oh, you're the kind of person who's like secretly good at a lot of things, which is both like awesome, and also if you're the kind of person who's secretly good at a lot of things, like, why are you keeping it in? Like, what are you so... And one of her refrains, as he's sort of asking, like, you know, first, second, third date questions, is she's just like, it's not that interesting. You want to know, like, how I grew up? It's not that interesting. What do I like to cook? It's not that interesting. And that's sort of someone constantly cleaving off the ability to know them before you even get in there.
Yeah, and it's an interesting lack of self-esteem that, like, oh, I'm not that interesting. I'm not even worthy of being understood. But then there's also the other dimension of stop bothering me. Like, why do you keep treating me like an interview subject instead of a friend? And I honestly relate to both the characters. I relate to her energy of, Jesus Christ, just leave me alone for 1 second, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
But I also relate to him too, in his neediness and this kind of feeling he has of like, why won't anyone be my friend? I am trying so hard. Throw
Sure.
me a bone.
Uh
I love the kind of, push and pull of, in a way, they're the two worst people to be alone in a room together, which is, of course, why you want them as an audience member for dramatic purposes to be alone in a room together.
Totally. Let's talk Daisy Ridley. She was, when she showed up in Force Awakens in 2015. I don't how old would she have been at the time? Like 24?
Maybe even younger than that.
Maybe even younger than that. And she's so clearly cast as the Luke of the new franchise. And I just remember thinking what I said earlier, from the moment that she's like scavenging things and turning them in the 1/4 portion or whatever, and she finds BB-8 and she's like, if you go over there, you'll sink into the sand and drown. I just remember being like, I am on this person's side. She was, for lack of a better phrase, and I mean this with like full compliment, she was adorable in the way that like Timothée Chalamet in Little Women is just like adorable. Like when you have a young actor in that place of just like, God, I just like, I'm happy for them and I want the best for them. Like, let's go. So here we are. That franchise, I guess I kind of know how you feel about it, but I think that franchise kind of crumbled in on itself, and it certainly did not, well, I'll say this, it certainly did not make choices in Rise of Skywalker that let Daisy Ridley do more interesting things with the character.
And I will say too that however weak the material was, the story, and at times it was pretty goddamn weak, to put it gingerly, she always, I felt, rose above the material. Like we can talk for hours about how lazy it was to just bring back Palpatine for one more go around, and yet her performance lends a real charge to that final confrontation. Like, even having that whole sequence of events being so kind of tired and stale, seeing her walk into that cave and the conviction of the performance, it's like, my God, she is making me care about a story that with a lesser actor I really could not care less about.
Yeah, maybe I have the same problem as J.J. Abrams, where they were just like, well, Rey is her main quality is that she's adorable, so let's cast her as a grandchild. This is how everyone sees her.
Long have I waited for my grandchild to come home.
Incredible that choice in a $300 million movie sounds just like something that could be in any number of Vincent Price movies from like the late 50s. Hello, my grandchild, welcome back. Anyway, one of her great modes is like, when she is underestimated, you're on her side. She has this great interplay between drama and comedy of like sheer indomitable determination, while also like she never quite plays it cool, and the movies often have a lot of fun with that. So tell me, you kind of pitched me, bless you, on like, let's talk State of Daisy Ridley, because she was in this movie this year, and The Young Woman in the Sea, and Magpie. Where do you think she's at in this kind of post-Star Wars time? What do you see her doing?
I really admire what she's doing, because I think if you think about the playbook for a young actor right now, it's Florence Pugh, right? You do a Marvel movie, you do an A24 folk horror movie, and when Christopher Nolan, Greta Gerwig, or Denis Villeneuve calls, you say yes, no matter how small the part is, because being a part of the tapestry of one of these great directors' visions is a huge asset to anyone. And I love Florence Pugh. I actually think she might be my favorite actress of that generation. But I also really admire that Daisy Ridley has very consciously done something different. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that she could book an MCU movie anytime she wants. And yet she is choosing to do these really kind of interesting movies that go against the grain of what's hip now, often that she produces herself, material that she cultivates herself. And they're movies that all show really different sides of her. You look at Sometimes I Think About Dying, which is so real and revels in very kind of authentic human interactions and awkward silences. Then you go to Young Woman in the Sea, which is a kind of big, solid, sentimental historical drama. The acting can't be as real. The acting has to be about driving the plot forward. And she does that spectacularly well as too. I mean, her charisma, I think, anchors that movie. And then to kind of cap off the Daisy Ridley trilogy of 2024, you have Magpie, which is a movie she developed herself, came up with the idea for it. And she plays a completely different kind of character, a character who seems very vulnerable and put upon at first, yet turns out to be this diabolical puppet master. And that I thought was really thrilling to see her kind of turn her likability inside out and play it in a different key, showing no, she can also be a cold, calculating character who kind of tricks everyone into underestimating her, and really they just end up dancing to her tune or playing out the script that she's writing. And I think that is like the most exciting acting of all. And she showed range without any kind of gimmicks, like none of the sort of traditional acting things that you lean on to get an Oscar, like, oh, I spoke with an Italian accent for a year to prove that I'm really serious, you know?
Yeah.
And not that there's not value in that, because I say whatever helps you give the best performance you can, that's great. But also I admire this kind of unfussy shape-shifting of like, what's the big deal? I'm an actor. I transform.
Totally. And The Young Woman in the Sea, which I watched in preparation for this, she plays Trudy Ederle, who is a real-life swimmer in the 30s who swam the English Channel, first woman to do that. A real pioneering figure in women's sports. And that is so the type of movie where you're going to be, where you could be like, I'm going to do a real Brooklyn voice. And, you know, I'm going to get my arms just so I look like a super athlete. And you know what she plays it like is Daisy Ridley. And it works great.
I've decided to swim the English Channel.
What do you mean?
I'm going to swim the English Channel.
No, I'm saying...
I wasn't asking. Please pass the bread.
A woman. She won't get past the 7th male.
I believe she'll die in that water.
You know, most men believe that we're too weak to compete.
And what if I make it? Then they got a serious problem.
The thing you love most, it terrifies me. I can't imagine something happens to you.
They're rooting against you, Trudy. They want the water to win.
I came all this way. Might as well see England.
And again, just has fun with kind of like how quietly maniacal her determination is.
Yeah.
Is there anything, Ben, that you see like, I guess I was putting together this theory of how maybe her great superpower is kind of like how she holds her mouth. Because if you watch her be interviewed and she's in a good mood, she has a gigantic smile, like, and just like very, very prominent teeth. And in a movie like Sometimes I Think About Dying, you just never ever see them. And you like, she's just, her mouth posture is so tight and closed, and it kind of tells you everything you need to know about how withholding this character is being to the world emotionally. And I think back on like some Star Wars moments that I love where like Han Solo, R.I.P., is offering her a job on the Falcon, and she's like, "Are you offering me a job?" And this like smile starts to come over her face, and he's just like, "We wouldn't be nice to you. It doesn't pay much." And it cuts back to her, and this reaction shot just of her like smile getting bigger and bigger and bigger, which like when she scrunches her face in determination, just like that whole visual palette just like disappears. So I guess I tossed out my theory there, but do you have any favorite like burgeoning Daisy Ridley like gestures or tics or choices that you have come to like or notice?
Yeah, and I am admittedly stealing this observation from Daisy Ridley herself because she's talked about this in interviews. But now that she's talked about it, I can't unsee it or unhear it, rather, which is that she shifts her voice in, I think, subtle ways that people often don't think about. Like if you listen to her in interviews, she has a pretty low voice, actually, and it's a kind of almost slightly flat tone that she speaks in. And she has a beautiful, beautiful voice, but she shifted it in a way for Star Wars that was interesting, where her voice was a little higher, it was a little more musical in a way. But then, she's been able to kind of shift it in other ways for these other movies. Definitely, we saw 2 movies, Young Women in the Sea. Sometimes I think about Dying back to back, where she was doing an American accent, but in very, very different ways. She's almost speaking in a monotone in Sometimes I Think About Dying. She's much more boisterous in Young Women in the Sea. And then you have Magpie, where maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she's doing something that I'm not aware of, but I think Magpie might be the first movie where I've seen where she's using her natural voice, which was interesting because she's speaking in a British accent and it's a bit lower. So it's just fascinating, I think, to observe like all these subtle things that we don't even perceive as viewers, where a lot of it that we take for granted is coming from so much work and so much thought from the actor. Star Wars, that would have never occurred to me that she was doing a different voice until I heard her talk about that on, I think, Happy, Sad, Confused. So it's really amazing to think about to use a Young Woman in the Sea-esque metaphor, the activity going on under the surface of the water.
There you go. And coming back to Sometimes I Think About Dying, one of the things I like about it as a character study is it's not one of those movies where you kind of put an actor in front of the camera and just be like, just act natural. There's so many choices being made that are discernible. She delivers this line in the car, her kind of like, get the fuck away from me, to Robert. But the line is, you're exhausting, no wonder you can't stay married. And she delivers it so fast that I'm trying to imagine like how many times she must have rehearsed that to make it seem like just this, knife coming out from under her coat and getting into his ribs before you even know like what happened. It's amazing that her brain worked so quickly to say something so cruel and impulsive. But those little gestures are all over this movie. Are there any specifically in this movie that you dig?
It's a good question. I mean, I love that scene because so much of the movie has been, it's not like that character is trying to please people, but she's definitely trying to hold a lot in, and she's not going to pretend not to be annoyed, but she's not going to visibly be annoyed when people are bothering her. And that's the first time she really kind of strikes out at someone. And that is really, really intense. But I also think that the final scene of the movie, which is maybe the most open and vulnerable that character is, and she's like saying, "Oh, do you hate me?" And he says, "I don't know you." And the fact that it's like, wow, all the armor is coming off, and she's saying so much that we have seen because we're in her head and understanding, what's going on inside her mind and the kind of beautiful, horrible visions that sort of consume her. But at the end, she's vocalizing some of that to another person for the first time. And I think that the fact that she doesn't overplay it, the fact that it's explained in a kind of matter-of-fact way, but in a way that you can still tell this is important for her, like this is a big step for her. I think that's just kind of exquisitely acted.
Totally. So let's talk about the morbid visions, because I was thinking about in a time in 2024 when therapy speak is probably at an all-time high in the culture, this movie like really deals in some kind of in-between space that is ambiguous and is kind of trying to defy language and diagnosis, perhaps. So what's your take on what the visions of death mean for Fran?
I'm really glad you asked that question because I think it's a really important thing to think about. And I loved the idea that the movie doesn't use the word suicide or suicidal ideation. There's not a conversation about that. And I can understand why some moviegoers would want that dealt with in a more explicit way. But to me, I saw this movie as someone who desperately needs help, but isn't able to ask for it, and maybe begins the process of asking for it by the end. And as much as I'm sure you could have made a version of this film where that character was in therapy, and maybe those conversations would be interesting, I think that there's something sort of perfect about the idea that we're just seeing the life of someone who hasn't diagnosed herself, who is just kind of going through her everyday life, living with her pain, living with the thoughts of death, and maybe dealing with it in a kind of structured way that she feels is good enough. But obviously she's super, super unhappy. And I think that there's something incredibly powerful about the climax of the movie is not her trying to kill herself. It's not her kind of delivering some big revelation. The climax is simply her admitting that she has these thoughts. Or I don't even really want to say admitting, more just sharing that that is a reality for her. And for the movie to kind of hold back and resist going for some kind of therapeutic denouement, I think is an act of real restraint that is pretty remarkable. And the truth is, movies I don't think have to be therapy. I mean,
Right.
Therapy is therapy. And the job of movies, I think, is just to kind of show us what someone's reality is like. And this movie just does an impeccable job of doing that.
You know, Robert has spent this whole movie kind of being like, so Fran, what are you passionate about? And she's like, nothing interesting. And there's almost this kind of dark way where she's saying like, you want to know what I spend my mental bandwidth on in this kind of like rich, imaginative way that could, in some sick definition, be construed as my passion? It's this. And that's like what she chooses to share with him. And I don't think she like conceives of it as a passion, but I think it's the closest thing. He keeps asking her, so what's your version of how I feel about movies? Because he's a cinephile. And it's just like, well, how about these like cinematic, surrealist, very elegantly created visions of her demise? And I feel like it's also part of what makes it a really good Oregon movie and an Oregon Coast movie, I will say, because it's not, there's something about the visions that are not just like conventional depictions of suicide. She's like being swallowed up by the natural surroundings. It's always her like, you know, where the body would be before it decomposes. And I as someone who lives out on the coast, one of the great things, or the things that brings me this weird sense of calm, is just like, you're just going to feel small out here. The river is the size of an ocean. The ocean is the biggest one in the world. There are mountains in the distance. This whole town seems like it could slide right off the hill if the right shake came along on the Richter scale. There is just this sense of like confronting your own mortality or smallness or just the inevitable, everything's going to go in the river at some point kind of feeling that takes me back to like, Sometimes a Great Notion, and Kesey being like, these people thought that they could come out here and like bend the Oregon wilderness to their will, and they didn't. They went mad because it bent them instead. And I feel like the movie has a great sense of place in that regard because the visions pertain to the setting.
It's true. And one of my favorite of the visions is when there's this recurring motif of her in a blue dress on the beach where the Peter Iredale is, and she's in this kind of wooden teepee. Her body is sort of draped over the logs.
Yeah.
And that's one of the fascinating things about the character, that she's imagining her own death. I mean, she's really, really hurting, but she imagines her death in such kind of creative, poetic ways. And as we sing in the murder mystery party, obviously she's an actor, she's a storyteller, she has this incredible creative energy that hasn't really found much expression outside of her head. And there is the sense of like, man, like if this person could sort of find the right outlet for that imagination, she would be this really, really powerful force. And that's another reason why I think it's great that the movie's not really trying to diagnose her or treat her like a freak or something. It's just treating her like a person. And the visions, they just are. They're horrifying. They're also beautiful. Both things are true. And to just kind of take the character as she is rather than trying to judge her, I think is a great act of compassion from the filmmakers.
Do you think the score does a lot of work in that regard?
I think so. I was actually listening to the score right before this to kind of refresh my memory on it. And I was thinking how there's a timelessness to it, because I can't remember any songs in this movie. I can't think of like any prominent bits of pop music or anything. And the score really feels almost like, in some ways, a very classic pared down orchestral score that makes it feel not quite of the 21st century. This could be a person at any moment in time, really.
Totally. Yeah, it's Dabney Morris, and it's very conspicuously harp driven, which just also kind of goes into the like, I think this is what it sounds like in her head. I think this is what it sounds like to, take a walk and be dwarfed by those barges and that bridge and that sky on a morning. And it's beautiful. And I think that again goes to like, there's something about her internal state, which when sized up in any mental health context is like danger, danger, danger. But to her and how she lives with it, it's rich in there. Let me share, because I'm right on it actually. We both talked to Rachel Lambert, who directed this movie this year. Who'd you write that piece for, Ben, so people can go find it?
Willamette Week.
It was for Willamette Week. There you go. I wrote mine for the Daily Astorian out here. My favorite tidbit of that interview was she talked about trying to find the score and working with the composer, and she's just driving around Astoria, like looking for the right words to get the juices flowing. And she was texting back and forth with him, and I think she's like, we're looking for a sound that's something like self-annihilative calypso. It's like, give me that Spotify playlist. What was your favorite thing that you got out of your interview with Rachel Lambert, the director?
Well, there were a couple things. I loved that she said there actually was a voiceover that they wrote, but they didn't use it in the film, and they had it thought of as like stage directions. She said Daisy Ridley was playing all of those thoughts as if the voiceover is in the movie, but it's just, purely in the physical performance, and the viewer has to kind of imagine those thoughts, which I thought was really exciting. And
what a good choice.
yes, yeah, and shows such trust in the audience, and allows us to kind of revel in the unknown a bit. But also, one thing that was really interesting was we talked a little bit about the Dave Merheje character and the kind of romantic / awkward friendship element of those characters. And I don't know that there was really a conclusion that our exchange on this came to, but I was just sort of sharing with her my perspective. Like, I can't almost imagine that situation in real life because it's such a weird dynamic. And partly that's just because in most offices I've worked in, I've usually been almost the only single person.
Sure.
So it would just not even like occur to me that like, oh, you would have a thing with a coworker. I don't even think of that as like a real option or a thing that happens anymore, but that's my bubble.
Sure.
And so it was kind of interesting to talk to Rachel and have a little bit of back and forth about like, what's the deal with this? Like, are they not worried that HR would have some feelings about this relationship? That there is a somewhat noticeable age difference between these two characters. How do we feel about that? And Rachel Lambert just kind of said, well, maybe he does really genuinely like her. And I just like kind of having that back and forth about that and trying to kind of better understand a really kind of weird, awkward element of the movie that was intended to be weird and awkward. Rachel said to me, she would say to Daisy Ridley and Dave Merheje, okay, that's awkward, but make it even more awkward. And you can totally see that in the movie.
Coming back to your kind of initial point about like relatability, or even in my case, like imagined relatability, you really don't see in movies, because the idea in any sort of dating escalation in a movie is to move the plot forward. In like a stereotypical like first date, second date, third date kind of way. And in this movie, it's so uneven. Like it's first date's like, it's pretty good, and then it's awkward here, and the second date is like it continues to be sort of awkward, and it's great, and then it gets interrupted, and the third one is also great and then bad, and it kind of leaves them both being like, what are we doing here? Which you so seldom see in movies, because like, why would a story make space for that? But you have to think happens all the time in real life, where people go on 3 dates and it's like very uneven, and there's just like an uncertainty that kind of hangs over the whole thing, which kind of felt novel to see in a movie.
Oh, it's totally novel, because I think movies often fail to grasp the reality of that, but it is true. And I think that one thing films have a hard time of discerning is the difference between the awkwardness of, oh yeah, I really don't want to spend any more time with this person ever, and the awkwardness of like, God, like that felt weird. I kind of hated myself during that interaction.
Yeah.
And yet there's like something here. Like I want to see this person again. I want to like see if there's anything here, because I feel that there's something, even though it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that's in the film. I mean, they have their one kiss, which is really kind of awkward and comes weird and out of the blue, and almost seems even kind of robotic. Like it's very hard to tell, does she really want to kiss him, or does she initiate because she feels like she's supposed to in some way? And then things seem to kind of like cool a bit after that, but they're still hanging out together. They're still kind of like pushing through the awkwardness, and that felt really real as well.
Sure. Ben, let's talk about both the fun and the perils of having movies be a huge part of your personality when you're.
I would not know anything about that.
Oh, sorry, I meant to ask someone else. But yeah, that's kind of where Robert is, and I think we can both comment on that on some level of like, how do you navigate when everything to you is a possible movie reference when you're dating someone or with someone?
So did you like the movie?
No.
What didn't you like about it?
I didn't really like anything about that movie.
Nothing? Thank you for not walking out.
Yeah, God. I'll let you know when I figure that one out.
Sure.
No, I actually have an answer to that. It's really tricky, I think, because you do have this language as a cinephile, and I do actually, it sounds crazy, but I think of being a cinephile as belonging to a church, essentially. You know, movies are our cathedral, and you talk about certain directors, you talk about certain scenes, that's like referencing things in the Bible. And sometimes it's very hard, I think, to kind of communicate with people who don't have that frame of reference. But of course you have to. You have to not be like Leonardo DiCaprio, Inception. You don't want to be at the point where you go so deep that you're wandering around in limbo.
Hey,
and
you made a movie reference. What are you doing?
See, and I'm illustrating the problem of this.
You are.
Even in this very
But
moment.
I got it. That's perfect for me.
No, but you know what I mean. It's
for sure.
It's a real challenge, and also the times. I'm reminded of a good friend of mine who was talking about one of his friends who often will say things like, "Oh, you know, you would like this person. They also like this," and I'm kind of like that as well. Like sometimes I've been in a situation where I thought I had chemistry with someone because we connected over a movie, and then it's like, oh, wait a second, a movie is a thing. A movie is not something you can base the whole relationship on. Like, put the brakes on, pal, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm saying that to myself, not to, you know, other people.
I think Robert, the character, is a sweet guy. I think he talks about movies a little too much, especially to someone who's not interested in them. I would toss this one out for myself and for anyone who loves movies, who's trying to date or even make friends or even have a pleasant conversation with other people who like movies. Never do I can't believe you haven't seen it. There's just no value to it. Maybe you like guilt a person into checking it out if the other person is like responsive to it in that way, but nobody likes I can't believe you haven't seen it.
And I can't do that because I have an insanely long list of movies I'm embarrassed to not have seen. So it's like you do that to someone else, it's like, well, the shoe could be on the other foot just as easily. I don't want anyone yelling at me for not having seen Lawrence of Arabia, and I'm not planning to watch it anytime soon. So that's just the reality.
That's a hill to plant your flag on. Not only have I not seen it, I won't be. I feel like
see it at some point. It's just I have to schedule a couple years of my life.
That's right. I feel like, you know what? I think I actually hit you with that one time because at the time you hadn't seen Jurassic Park, and I regret it to this day. I'm not. I don't think anyone should hit anyone else with the can't believe you haven't seen it.
I don't remember that chance, so I wasn't scarred for life. You're good.
All right.
I've seen Jurassic Park since whenever we had that conversation, and it fucking rules.
Yeah, that's what I knew when I tried to bully you into seeing it. I knew you'd like it. Okay.
It's a wholesome movie. It's a wholesome movie about learning to love children and dinosaurs.
This is an important question that we're probably getting to too late in the show, but who cares? Is this movie down a 0.5 star, 1 star, if it's set like in Rhode Island or something? How in the bag are we, as someone who quoted Ken Kesey earlier, for Oregon Coast shit?
It's a very fair question. I mean, I'm going to say something that will probably make a lot of people listening hate me, but there is a kind of scale as Oregon film buffs where you do always have to ask that question.
Yep.
Is it a good movie or is it good for an Oregon movie?
Oh
And
God.
not, which is not to say that wonderful movies don't come out of this part of the world. It's
They
just
do.
that we get so enthusiastic about sort of seeing things we recognize
Yeah.
on film that it does tip us. I mean, I am totally an example of this. Like Bigger Than the Sky, which is a movie with John Corbett is a like theater guy in Portland. Amy Smart's in the film as well.
Okay.
It's not a very good movie, but I own it and I've seen it a zillion times because the Hollywood Theater and the Burnside Bridge are in it. You know,
I never heard of this movie. Bigger Than the Sky?
sue me. It's so much fun because there's a real kind of Portlandy vibe that I could just
Wow.
groove to forever. But in the case of Sometimes I Think About Dying, yes, I think it would be a good movie wherever it was set. I mean, I think the visual beauty, the conviction of the performances, it rises to a level that I think I would even like it if it were set in Beaverton. And I can say that because my mother is from Beaverton and would say that too.
You just want to watch traffic all day. That's the Beaverton movie. Yeah, it's got some good. I think it even for anyone who does care about its Astoria bona fides, I love that they really embedded this production, and I think there's even like inside jokes in the movie where I think is it Jeb Barrier's character, Portland actor Jeb Barrier, is like looking out the Port Authority window and he's just like, You see that ship over there? And his coworker's like, yes, I see it. It's very large, which is like, spend 6 months in Astoria and like, no one wants to talk to you about the big boats. Like, who gives a shit? So I feel like they themselves are like getting over the first layer of like stuff you would point at. And when I saw this movie with an Astoria crowd at the Columbia in downtown, people didn't holler for the bridge. The biggest laugh in the movie that felt like patentedly Astoria was there's this pan up in her office to this foam drop ceiling tile that has a water stain in it. And people were like, that's quintessential 90% humidity. That's exactly what our foam ceiling tiles look like when the water does its thing over decades and decades. So it earned it.
I love that. And especially because this was a movie that it wasn't made by anyone who had like any real relationship to the town. This was literally just filmmakers going, oh, this looks like the right town for this story. And the fact that they could capture detail like that shows that they really did their homework and kind of immerse themselves in the community, which I think is awesome.
Totally. Just scouted the heck out of it. Ben, what do you want to see Daisy Ridley do next? You compared her to Florence Pugh earlier. Do you think, is there a page she should take out of Pugh's book? Is there a page she should take out of any actor's kind of career arc book? What do you think?
I think that even though this is a weird comparison, what she's doing kind of reminds me of what Sydney Sweeney is doing right now, because Sydney Sweeney is also producing a lot and developing her own material. So there's a kind of symbiosis there. I think Magpie was really exciting in terms of seeing her play a character who kind of revels in a certain darkness and vindictiveness, and that made me go, oh man, I could totally see her as a villain. Like, imagine seeing her cutting loose and being like, I don't know, a vampire in a Tim Burton movie, or
she's got the teeth.
Yeah, something really wacky like that. But I'm also excited that she has not one, but 2 Martin Campbell action movies coming up.
Is this so?
Yes.
2?
Yeah.
I'm surprised Martin Campbell has 2 action movies left in him. Do we know anything about either of them?
One is called Cleaner. I think
Okay.
she plays a janitor, and it's a kind of Die Hard-esque scenario.
That
and
sounds
then
great.
another is a war film, which that's really interesting too. I mean, she was in a Star War and she was pretty convincing, so why not a war without lightsabers?
There you go. I mean, she's the janitor in a hijacked building. That's just like, that's exactly the mode I want to see. She's quick on her feet. She's resourceful. She's going to be outnumbered like 40-1, and the whole time you're going to be like, get him, Daisy, get him. It's going to be great.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's like it sells itself. I mean,
Yeah. Well, it will probably make $0, but
yeah. Well, it sells itself to people like you and me.
Yeah. To people, it sells itself to people who want free screeners of the film. Ben, truth or trivia, my friend? What do you want to do? Truth. For you, what's the best movie ever made in Oregon?
Honestly, it might be Sometimes I Think About Dying.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna name names, but there is a long list of Oregon filmmakers who are pretty prominent and well-known whose work I really don't connect with, to be honest.
Can I force you to do a trivia?
Please, yeah.
In one of Robert's, I think more annoying, like, I'm a film fanatic and I can't help myself moments, he has Fran pick out a CD from his collection to put on while they make pasta. He goes, why did you pick this? Have you seen the movie? And she's like, no. And she's just like, he's like, well, you definitely haven't seen it. And they never say in the movie what soundtrack it is. But the song is called Mysteries of Love. It's from an iconic 80s film. And if you, in the credits, you can figure out what movie it's from. Do you happen to know?
No, I have no idea. What is it?
It's from Blue Velvet.
Oh, okay.
Which is a real, like, film bro thing to do, being like, you've never done Blue Velvet. But I love it. I love it. They like got it in the movie. I always just assumed it was like a made up or something that was composed for the movie, but it is Mysteries of Love from Blue Velvet, and it does play while they give the house tour, and it's quite romantic.
That scene makes a lot more sense to me now, because I think I too would be weirded out if someone put on the Blue Velvet during a seemingly convivial evening.
Didn't even offer her a Pabst Blue Ribbon. Can I, as a way of saying goodbye to you on the pod this year, my friend, and thank you so much for popping by so many times and talking. I've enjoyed them all.
Thanks for having me.
Would you mind giving us your top 5 as it stands on November 24th, with the possibility that it changes possibly entirely between now and December 31st?
Yeah, which I expect it will change, and I don't want to tip my hand too much, so I'll list these in alphabetical order.
Okay, nice.
But right now, I'm going to go The Brutalist, Conclave, Doom Part 2, Evil Does Not Exist, and Megalopolis.
Nice. That's an interesting top 5.
Thank you.
I don't know if I share any of them, but I think I respect all of them. I have not seen Hamaguchi's Evil Does Not Exist. You've been on that one for 8 months now. That's like really hung in there for you, right?
Yeah, that was one of those movies that really kind of stays with you in an intense way, because it's a tough film. I fully admit that during the first several minutes of the movie, when it was just endless shots of trees, I was like, what the fuck is this? This is so boring. What are we doing here? You know, like put a red saw back in the movie, you know, make it more like Drive My Car. But it's a film that the deeper you get into it and the more you realize what it's saying about nature, and nature is this kind of all-powerful force that will basically take hold of the people who desecrate it and the people who defend it alike. It's a movie that is really kind of, you know, beautiful, but in a really sort of, you know, dark way of like Mother Earth comes for us all, and it's not always going to be pleasant. And even if you're like a stalwart citizen who recycles, at the end of the day, you know, that doesn't make you more precious to this sort of great being that is bigger than any one of us or even us as a collective.
Beautifully said. Robert's taken a lot of strays on this show, but he does have a great moment where Fran is like, why do you like movies? And he's like, you get to watch and try to understand. And I was like, that's it. That's it. And I feel like you just described exactly that with Evil Doesn't Exist.
We'll have to engrave that like on a like granite, you know.
You get to watch, ...
To watch and understand.
Try to understand. Well, thanks again for the time, man. Great choice. This was a really, really fitting one to chop it up with you about.
Oh, thank you, Chance. It's so much fun.